Jesus says some hard things. How many of you know that there's things in Christianity that are they're just difficult. They're difficult things to swallow. They're hard things to hear, hard things sometimes to understand, even more hard things to obey. And this is one of those days where Jesus is going to say several hard things without apology. He doesn't soften it, he doesn't sweeten it, he doesn't water it down. He just says some hard things today. And we're in a series called Grace and Truth. And this is exactly what's happening. Jesus is doing this grace and truth thing that he does so perfectly well. He showed them grace. He fed them all. Physically, he fed them all. Gave them all free lunch. Grace. Let me just take care of you. That's what grace says. Let me just lavish on you. Let me just bless you. And he blesses them all with a free meal. And now comes the truth part. He goes, all right, let me give you a sermon that ties into what we just experienced. And so Jesus is giving them the truth part, and he doesn't hold back. And so Landon started actually this sermon last week. It's kind of one long sermon Jesus gives. It's really long. We broke it up into 2 weeks, where Jesus is talking about himself being the bread. You guys just ate bread. That's real nice. I'm going to tell you that I'm living bread. And so we're going to pick it up today. We're in John chapter 6, verse 51. Hard things to hear from Jesus. Here we go. Verse 51, Jesus says, I am the living bread that came down from heaven. And if anyone eats of this bread, he will live forever. Jesus is making promises about what will happen if you partake of him. And then he says, hard thing number one, the bread that I will give you for the life of the world is my flesh. I'm sorry. Excuse me, Jesus, can you say that again? What, your flesh, right? What did he just say? Now, you know, before you pat yourselves on the back, I'm like, oh, those silly people back then, they always misunderstood Jesus, right? Jesus said, you got to partake of my flesh. It's my flesh. The bread is my flesh. We would have been like, what? We would have probably missed it too. And so this is the reaction of the people. Verse 52, at that, the Jews argued among themselves, how can this man give us his flesh to eat? They took Jesus literally. Jesus has been misunderstood from the time he walked on the earth 2,000 years later. He's still misunderstood about the things that he says. And instead of clarifying what he meant, instead of being like, oh, I'm sorry, that didn't connect, my little metaphor didn't connect, let me make it clear to you, I'm sorry. Jesus actually doubles down and muddies the waters even more with what he says next. Verse 53, Jesus said to them, truly I tell you, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you do not have life in yourselves. What? Did we just enter the twilight zone here? What is Jesus saying? In case you didn't get it the first time or the second time, he says it again the very next verse. The one who eats my flesh and drinks my blood has eternal life. I'm going to raise him up on the last day, because my flesh is true food and my blood is true drink. Wow, thanks, Jesus. That helps clear things up a lot there. What does this mean? What is Jesus talking about? Eating his flesh and drinking his blood, right? And the crazy thing, and Jesus is saying this to people who don't even eat pork, let alone human people, right? And so they're missing the whole thing. And so just as a side note, here's a little takeaway. Sometimes there's going to be parts of the Bible, sometimes there's going to be parts of following Jesus that you don't get when you first hear it. That it doesn't click, doesn't make sense. Maybe not even the first time, maybe not the second time, maybe not even the third time. You're just like, I just don't get this. And it would be real easy at that moment to just throw your hands up in the air, to just tap out, to just want to walk away, and to not do what I want to encourage you to do. And that is to press into that misunderstanding, to not allow that confusion or that doubt to then have you walk away from what Jesus is wanting you to see. Clearly, Jesus could have said something clearer, simpler, easier to understand. The fact that he's giving a little bit of, and this is a metaphor. This is a symbolism, right? And Jesus does this all the time. He'll do this. He did this in chapter 3 with Nicodemus, right? He was talking to Rabbi Nicodemus, and he told him, Nicodemus, you need to be born again. And Nicodemus took him literally. He's like, what? I enter my mother's womb for a second time? No, that's not what he's talking about. He did this when he was talking to the Samaritan woman in John chapter 4 with the woman at the well. He said, listen, I'm going to give you water. It's living water. She's like, living? I want some of that living water. Jesus uses spiritual metaphors to help people not just get it, but press in a little bit. And my point in saying this is if you don't get Jesus at first, don't throw your hands up and walk away. Sometimes he says things purposefully with a little bit of intrigue to cause you to take steps closer towards him to really try to understand what he's saying. He could have made this very easy, and he purposefully didn't. So he gives a little clue. He's going to give him a clue next in the next verse. He says, the one who eats my flesh and drinks my blood remains in me, and I in him. Okay, now he's explaining a little bit more about what this means. The one who eats my flesh, drinks my blood, he remains in me, and I'm going to remain in him. Oh, so there's some kind of relational component here to what Jesus is talking. Maybe he's not talking about literally eating his flesh, but he's talking about some kind of abiding or remaining or intimacy or closeness of a relationship. He's talking about the way that you and him are going to be together. And so he's going to help us understand what does it really mean that he's the bread. And this is what we do a lot of times when it comes to Jesus. People, I just happen to have a piece of bread here. And so sometimes what people want to do when it comes to Jesus is they want to just kind of be around the bread. Well, I'll just kind of be around the bread. That's good enough. Are you experiencing what it means to have the bread? No, you're just around the bread. Sometimes people are like, well, I believe that that's bread. I believe that is actually the components that make up bread. Yeah, I believe it. And sometimes people will do that. I believe. Sometimes people want to get a little bit closer and they will actually kind of investigate the bread. And let me see what it kind of feels. And sometimes people will get even a little bit closer. They want to really, and they'll want to sniff the bread, or maybe even just put just a little nibble on the bread, get close enough. And sometimes that's what people do with Jesus. And what Jesus is trying to get people to understand about him being the bread is that until you pick up the bread and you what? Partake of the bread. Sorry, dear. Until, I should probably wait till I finish chewing, right? A little bit. So I brought up a water bottle because I knew it's a little dry. Until you partake of the bread, and the bread is in you. This is what Jesus is talking about. He doesn't want religiosity, is a bunch of rules and regulations, kind of being around the bread or close to the bread or believing it's bread or hanging out with other people that eat the bread. No. He says, listen, I want you to receive me, believe in me, receive me, partake. This is what it's going to mean. This is how close we're going to be. I'm going to be in you and you're going to positionally be in me, and we're going to be in relationship together. I am the living bread. This is the first of 7 I am statements that Jesus is going to make. all throughout the Gospel of John, he says, I am. And he's going to make 7 of these statements. They're not found in the other Gospels. It's kind of a organizing structure of John's Gospel is where Jesus says these 7 I ams. This is the first one. I am the bread of life. He's going to say other things like, I am the good shepherd. I am the gate for the sheep. I am the resurrection and the life. I am the way, the truth, and the life. He's going to say these 7 I am statements, which, if you know a little bit about the Old Testament, and you know a little bit about when Moses first met God in the burning bush, and God told Moses to go to Pharaoh, and Moses was making all kinds of excuses, and he said, I don't want to go. And he said, well, when I get there, who should I tell him sent me? And God's answer is, this is who sent you. The I am has sent you. That's how God identifies his name, the I am. It is the Hebrew translation of the words Yahweh. I am. And so here is Jesus, again, 7 times in John, for those who say Jesus never claimed to be God. He does it 7 times when he says literally, when he uses the I am, he is identifying himself with the God of the Old Testament, Yahweh. I am the bread of life. And so he says in verse 57, just as the living Father sent me and I live because of the Father, so the one who feeds on me will live because of me. This is the bread that came down from heaven. 7 times in this sermon that Jesus is giving here, he says he's come down. I've come down. I've come down from heaven, come down from the Father. I'm the bread that's come down 7 times in this sermon. And he says it's not like the manna that your ancestors ate. It's not like the bread they ate. They ate it and they still died. The one who eats this bread will live forever. He said these things while teaching in a synagogue in Capernaum, which is a cool little side note. When we, not if, but when we go to Israel 2024, fall of 2024, when we go, we'll visit Capernaum, and we'll visit the synagogue. The remains are still there. You can see the remains of the first century synagogue that Jesus would have said these things in is there, but they've since built another one on top of it. And you can totally see the remains of that synagogue. But you'll see the remains of the first century synagogue where Jesus is saying these things. And so Jesus is saying, listen, yeah, bread's good. It sustains you. It helps you get from day to day. It was their primary source of sustenance back then, was bread, right? It was the easiest thing to make, and it was the easiest thing to have to fill your belly and to sustain you. And Jesus is saying, but you're still going to die. As much bread as you want, if you eat of me, you'll live forever. Why? Because I've come down from heaven. And I offer you heaven. I have access to heaven. I'm the way to heaven. And so Jesus is saying these hard things, and they ain't getting it. And you would think at this point, Jesus is reading the crowd, and he would say, all right, I see you guys are struggling with this. Let me clear it up. And he doesn't do that. He doesn't, as a matter of fact, he presses in even more. He's going to have a follow-up conversation now with his 12 disciples. He's saying this in the synagogue. He's saying this to a larger crowd. And then he's going to talk to his disciples, not just the 12 apostles. Disciple, the Greek word for disciple just means learner, student, follower. That's the Greek word, mathetes, disciple. And so he had lots of disciples that were following him around. And so he turns to the disciples, and this is what he's going to say. Verse 60, therefore, when many of his disciples heard this, they said, this teaching is hard. Who can accept it? Jesus, knowing in himself that his disciples were grumbling about this, asked them, does this offend you? Jesus knows his teaching's hard. And you can see where he's about to go next. He's not looking to make it easy. He's not going to make it easy. As a matter of fact, Jesus right now is being incredibly exclusive and not at all inclusive. As a matter of fact, in a few chapters from now, he's going to say literally the words, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one gets to heaven. No one goes to the Father except through me. Incredibly exclusive. Jesus is being right now. And then he says this to them, verse 62. He says, does this offend you? Okay, then what if you were to observe the Son of Man ascending to where he was before? He's like, look, if you guys are having a hard time believing that I'm the bread of heaven, that just like my Father sent down manna from heaven, that my Father sent me the bread of heaven that came down from heaven, you're going to lose your minds. What are you going to do when you see the Son of Man ascending to heaven? After I die and I rise again from the grave and I ascend back to my rightful spot, what are you going to be offended then? This is what he's saying. You're going to lose your minds when you see me return to heaven from the grave. And then Jesus says something that's so very important for us to understand how now to live the Christian life with him ascended into heaven. He's going to say some very important words. They seem kind of cryptic at first. I want to try to explain it to you. We'll camp out there for a little bit. It's the next verse. After he talks about ascending into heaven, he says this, the Spirit is the one who gives life. The flesh doesn't help at all. The words that I have spoken to you are spirit and life. And so what we see here is Jesus wanting to compare and contrast two different things. Life in the Spirit and life in the flesh. These two things that are in opposition with one another. So let me try to illustrate what I think, how this works and what does it look like, okay? I think I've shared this possibly before, but there's a part I don't think I've shared before. Some of this might be a review for some of you. So you all know my excellent drawing skills, all right? So here we are. And everybody is born into the world. Everybody is born into the world spiritually dead. This is what the Bible teaches. That when we're born into this world, we're born in spiritually separated from the Father because of the inherited sin that we've gotten from our fathers, all the way back to the garden. And so everybody is born into this world, and they're born with two parts to them. Okay? They're born with a soul. Everybody has a soul. And what makes up your soul is three parts. Is your mind, your will, and your emotions. It's what makes you, you. This is the way you think, this is the way you choose, and this is the way you feel. Right? That's your soul. And then everybody is born into this world with a body. And the Bible uses different words for that. The part of the body that kind of drives behavior of the spiritually dead person is called the flesh. It is the source of things that lead us astray. Our flesh desires unspiritual things. And so everybody that's born into the world is born only with these two parts. And so this is what Jesus is having this conversation with Nicodemus and says, you need to be born again. You're spiritually dead. You need to be made spiritually alive. That's what baptism is a picture of. It's a picture of going under the water. The old you is dying, and the new you, spiritually alive, comes up out of the water. And so the reality is when you meet Christ and you're born again, you now have three parts. Your flesh doesn't go away. It's still there. And you still have a soul with your mind, your will, and your emotions. But now you're made spiritually alive. And he gives you the Holy Spirit. That now, instead of living according to the flesh, and a lot of times the flesh influences these things, right? The flesh influences our mind. And so we have unholy thoughts. We have fleshly thoughts, right? Our lives are basically a direction that our thoughts have taken us. And a lot of times the reason you get into trouble is because it started in your mind and you had fleshly thoughts. And then your will listened to your mind. It was influenced. You make fleshly decisions. You make decisions that are unspiritual, unholy. And then we have fleshly emotions, greed and selfishness and things of that nature that all playing together, right? And now what happens is when you become born again, you're giving a new director. You're giving a new operating system within you to try and now live, instead of living this way, we now try to live this way. We want to go this way. We want to have spirit-filled thoughts. We want to make spirit-filled decisions. We want to have spirit-filled emotions. And so all of us right now experience daily a battle between your flesh and your spirit. And there's a civil war within you every day. The Apostle Paul talks about this in Romans chapter 7. In Romans chapter 7, Paul says, man, the good that I want to do, I cannot do. The bad that I don't want to do, this I keep on doing, right? He talks about it, and he goes back and forth. It's really almost a humorous passage. It's encouraging to me to know that the Apostle Paul still struggled with this. And he talks about the battle between the spirit and the flesh that lives within us. Here is, though, why a lot of us get stuck. And can you throw up the verse? Just flip over to the verse. Jesus said it's the Spirit who gives life. The flesh what? Doesn't help at all. But a lot of times what we do is we try to fight the flesh by using fleshly standards. So in other words, we know we're supposed to be spiritual. We know we're supposed to be holy. We know we're supposed to, and so we use human effort to fight a spiritual battle. We say things like, I'm really serious this time. I'm going to be more determined this time. I'm going to be more obedient this time. I'm going to be more accountable this time. And then we end up making like stupid promises to God in that. We say, God, if you will just do this, I promise you I will never do this again, right? And you relying on you to be spiritual is a failure of a game plan for you to be holy. Jesus says the flesh doesn't help at all. You can't fight the flesh with the flesh. You can only fight the flesh, how? Through the Spirit, right? This is the principle that I want you to get, what Jesus is saying. You can't fight flesh with flesh. You can only fight flesh by learning to live in the Spirit. And a lot of us grew up learning fleshly methods on how to be a good Christian boy and girl. Make sure you do all the do's, you don't do the don'ts, and it's up to you to do, right? And it's crazy because a lot of us would say, no, we know we're saved by Jesus. We're saved by faith alone. I can do nothing to save myself. It's all Jesus. And then we lived a Christian life as if now your salvation depends upon you being good. And so you can't fight flesh with flesh. You got to fight the flesh with the flesh doesn't help at all. There's no life in the flesh. There's only life in the Spirit. And so how do you win this civil war that wages? I want to teach you what is called the starve-feed principle, or the feed-starve principle. And this is how this works, okay? The feed-starve principle, in order for you to turn that frown upside down and to live in the Spirit, is you have to starve the one that you want to die. And you feed the one that you want to thrive. And so if you want to live spiritually, you need the Spirit. You got to feed the Spirit, and you've got to starve the flesh. Things that feed your fleshly nature. And so you've got to stop listening to the stuff that goes into your head that is fleshly stuff that Jesus had to die for on the cross. You got to stop feeding yourself that. Some of us are shooting ourselves in the foot by trying to live the Christian life and then feeding our flesh that's preventing us from being spiritual. And then we try to use the flesh to fight the flesh. And it's no wonder that so many people get stuck in their spiritual lives. You've got to guard your heart. You've got to guard your eyes, guard your ears. The ways of the world. The enemy has lots of carrots that he likes to dangle around out here that speak to our flesh. And you've got to guard your heart in that. Young people, students, listen to me. It is so easy with these things that we have with us 24/7 to be influenced by the TikToks and reels of worldly people putting worldly philosophies out there about how you should live and how to have your best life now and all of these things. And listen to me, your flesh is being discipled by the world. And instead of being discipled to be more like Jesus, you're being discipled to be more like the world. And let me tell you about the bread of the world. The bread of the world looks good. It looks appealing. And everybody's enjoying it. Everybody's munching on the bread of the world. And it even tastes good. Feels good. But let me tell you where the bread of the world leaves you. It leaves you unsatisfied. And it leaves you unfulfilled. And I promise you that it's only the bread of Jesus alone and the enemy has gotten us to believe, well, that bread is unappealing, that bread is lame, that bread, nobody else is wanting that bread, no one else is eating it, and if I do that bread, I'm going to stand out, I'm going to be weird, I'm going to be different. But I promise you that it's only the bread of Jesus that alone truly satisfies you. Everything else is going to leave you wanting more. It's never enough. You just always kind of want more because it never fills you up. It never satisfies. The enemy has all kinds of different versions of bread to speak to your flesh. You got to feed your spirit. We've got to start killing our flesh. The flesh counts for nothing. The flesh doesn't help at all. And feed the spirit. Start turning off sports talk radio for a little bit and start putting on worship music throughout the day. And let the praises of God start filling your head and your heart. Some of you are trying to grow spiritually, and you do not have a diet of God's word. You're not feeding yourself. You come, and this is the only feeding you're going to get this week, and then you're going to show up next Sunday, and you're like, all right, Joe, feed me again. And you're eating once a week. And I just want to lovingly encourage you to say, you've got to learn to be a self-feeder. You've got to open up the Word. You can't go days and weeks without yourself opening up God's Word and then be a spiritual Christian growing. You cannot. This is why we wrote those devotional guides. We want to try to help you. We know sometimes it's not always easy. Sometimes there's hard things. Sometimes it's confusing. So we write devotional guides. There's a devotional guide written specifically this past week for this message for you to have for this week. And they're out there every week. Take them and use them and feed yourself on God's word. The flesh doesn't help for anything. All right. Sum it up like this. What you feed grows. What you starve shrinks. Right? So Jesus is saying the flesh is no help at all. And then you'd be like, all right, Jesus, now take a breath and ease up on the people. And he doesn't. He keeps going. Verse 64, there are some among you who don't believe. Imagine being in the presence of Jesus, and he's looking over the crowd, and he's looking at the people, eyeball to eyeball, and he says, some of you don't believe. Right? You can feel some nervous energy in the group all of a sudden. And it says, for Jesus knew from the beginning those who did not believe and the one who would betray him. He said, this is why I told you no one can come to me unless it's granted to him by the Father. And from that moment, many of his disciples turned back and no longer accompanied him. That was it. They had enough. Enough of this. Jesus didn't chase them. Jesus is going to be like, wait, I'm just kidding. Let me say it this way. Wait. He doesn't go after them. He doesn't chase them. And then he turns to the 12, and he says, you don't want to go away too, do you? And Simon Peter answered him, Lord, Who am I going to go? You have the words of eternal life. Then he says this, we have come to believe and know that you're the Holy One of God. I want you to notice a couple things here I want to talk about real quick. First, I want you to notice the we. Jesus is speaking to the 12. Peter, the self-nominated spokesperson, speaks on behalf of the 12, and he says we. He's speaking for everybody else. I want you to just put a pin in that. Remember the we. And then he says this, have come to believe. Have come to believe. Now, so listen, if you have somebody in your life, a loved one, a friend, a family member, a neighbor, a coworker, and they're just no, 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 I want to encourage you that people coming to believe in Jesus is a process. And it doesn't often happen the first time or the second time or the third time. So listen to me. Do not stop praying. And do not stop loving. And do not stop serving. And do not stop letting your light shine. And do not stop planting little God seeds. And do not stop praying. And do not stop loving. And do not stop serving. Don't stop. Why? Because for almost everybody, it's rare that the first person that hears about Jesus and their sins and needs a Savior and is I'm in, and takes a bite of Jesus. For most people, it is a have come to believe. And we get to be part of that process of people coming to. So don't lose hope and don't give up, okay? And Jesus replied to them, didn't I choose you, the 12? Yet one of you is a devil. I mean, Jesus is just really going for it now. You want to talk about nervous energy in the group? I mean, how if I was looking out among you and I said, one of you here is a devil. And you're going to start looking around and you're going to look at me and then you're like, I already got it figured out. You're going to point to the person over here. And it says he was referring to Judas, Simon Iscariot's son, one of the 12, because he was going to betray him. And in such a way, I am thankful that John included this part, and this is how it ends. I'm not thankful that Judas was a betrayer and a fake and a hypocrite. I'm thankful for the picture of, here's Judas, who was literally every day with the living bread, who was literally every day. He heard every sermon Jesus gave in person. He saw the miracles. He spent 3 years with him every day. If there was anybody that had a front row of Jesus and the power of Jesus and the teaching of Jesus, the miracles of Jesus, the truth of Jesus, the authenticity of Jesus, it was Judas who was right there. And he is all around the bread. He's close to the bread. He's with other people that believe in the bread. I'm sure he sniffed the bread, he's nibbled the bread, but he's never partook of the bread. And it just shows me that you can, listen, be careful in here. You can be all around the bread, but until you take that, until you have faith, you believe and you receive, until you partake and put your faith in Jesus, you don't have the bread. And Judas is a picture of that. All around him. He fooled everybody. Remember I told you, don't forget that we have come to believe? Peter spoke on behalf of everybody. Jesus, we're all in. We've all come to believe. Judas had everybody fooled, thinking that he was one of the guys. He's one of the Christian guys in with Jesus. Except he didn't have Jesus fooled. And you might be here and you have everybody fooled. You have your family fooled. You have your friends fooled. But deep down inside, you know you have not partaken. And today is the day. Today is the day where you say, all right, I believe Jesus is who he says he is, and I'm going to partake. I'm going to ask our worship team to come, and we're going to close. I mean, how can we not take communion today? Today is the day of communion. By the way, our Catholic friends, they get this part respectfully. They get it all wrong. They get it all wrong. right? I grew up Catholic like many of you did. I was an altar boy, the whole thing. You know, we were taught transubstantiation. Transubstantiation. That the elements are literally the literal body and blood of Christ. The host that the priest holds up and the wine that he drinks is literally the body and blood of Christ. And they take this passage and they skew it, just kind of like the original hearers did. They didn't get it right. They missed the whole thing of what Jesus was talking about in having a relationship with him. And so they make communion into something that it was never meant to be. Do you know how scary it was at the communion part when you're 11-year-old altar boy and you think you're holding the literal body of Jesus? Right? I mean, that's pressure for an 11-year-old kid to not want to drop Jesus on the ground in the middle of it. They get it all wrong. And Jesus, on the last night of his life, would hold up a piece of bread and he'd say, "This is my body, which is going to be broken for you." Sometimes we get questions from people. Why don't we do communion more often? Why don't we do communion every week? And maybe it is part in me, I'm willing to admit this, of my background. I think some of you can relate to this. I took communion every week for 15 years. And you know what? It meant nothing. It lost all of the meaning and the significance of it because it just became another ritual, just became another part of what you do on Sundays. And I pray, church, that we will never, ever lose the amazing wonder of God dying for you. That when you take communion, that you would be in awe of his amazing grace, that Jesus shed his blood and broke his body for you. And so that's what he did on the last night of his life. He knew what was about to happen on Friday. This was Thursday night. He knew what was about to happen on Friday. The guys, I'm convinced, they had no clue. They had no clue what the next 12 hours would hold. But he knew. And so he took the bread, he broke it, he passed it around, and he said, "This is my body." Now listen, communion is something that believers, Christians, do when you've already said yes to Jesus. And if you're here and you're not sure, have you really partaken of the bread? Have you really said yes to Jesus? Communion is something for those that have already done it, and then we do communion. Jesus said, "Do this in remembrance of me," to remind us of how much Jesus loves us and our relationship that we have with him. But if you don't have that relationship, you should not take communion. But before we do this, I want to give you the chance to say yes to Jesus. Right now, you're like, "How do I do this?" I'm not going to single you. I'm not going to embarrass you. I'm going to have everybody close their eyes. And if that's you right now can talk to Jesus quietly in your heart. You say something like this: "Jesus, today I believe. I do more than just believe. I receive you. Jesus, I'm placing my faith in you. Jesus, I'm asking you, come into my life. I trust you. You are the bread of life. Forgive me for my sins. Thank you for dying on the cross for me. Thank you for giving your body for me. Today I believe. Jesus, I want you." Amen. If you did that, the Bible says now you are born again. Literally, you are spiritually born again. You have a relationship with Jesus. And this first communion, now this is the true first communion that you take with great significance and meaning of remembering Jesus who died for you. So church, let's partake together. After he broke the bread, he took the cup, he held it up, he blessed it, and he said, "This is my blood, what's going to be shed." Jesus shed his blood for you. Jesus shed his blood for you. What's the greatest thing anybody could ever do for you? Die for you. And that's what God did. God died for you, shedding his blood. Let's partake together. So before we close with this song, I got one last question I want to ask you. With all of this, what we talked about today, my question for you is this: what is your next? What's your next? What do you do with this? What do you do with Jesus talking about partaking with him, saying the flesh doesn't count for anything, it's the Spirit that gives life? What is God calling you to be, to do, to know, to change? He wants to walk with you through it.